Hi everyone, welcome to the first webcast. We are going to be talking about Chapter 7, GDP and the price level. We're going to get some basics out of the way so we're ready to go on Monday. So first off, I want to show you this expanded circular flow diagram. You may have already seen a circular flow diagram before, but this one is going to be talking specifically about money and the transfers of money and how we see this money moving throughout our economy. So first, what we're going to talk about are the households and firms, which is pretty basic. And the way we think about it is households, what you guys may be familiar with, would be consumer spending. You spend money on goods and services. So you spend money in the market for goods and services, and firms will also pay their workers in turn in wages, profit, interest, and or rent. So this is the money flowing out of the firms. So the money flowing out of the households would be your consumer spending. The money flowing out of the firms would be considered wages, profit, interest, and rents that go into what we call factor markets. And as we said, there's only two entities in this diagram. So if the firm is paying out wages and profit, it has to go specifically to the household for this. And then we can bring the government in. Households, whenever they get their wages, profit, interest, and rent, as you all well know, we pay taxes. That's one of the for sure things in life, death and taxes. The government also will engage after they get their taxes from us in government transfers, and households will get a certain amount of government transfers in the form of Social Security benefits, unemployment insurance, various examples like that. Further, the government, instead of just handing the money to the households, they can also purchase goods and services. So, for instance, whenever they purchase labor to have them build a bridge or invest in infrastructure in the roads and various very important things that we need, that would be under our government purchases of goods and services. So, the government income is going to mainly come from taxes. Outflow will be in the form of government transfers and purchases of goods and services. Let's bring in another part of this, would be the financial markets. So we've talked about buying concrete things, right? In the factor market, you're purchasing labor or you're renting a building for your business. And for households, you're going to be spending on things, goods and services. Again, with governments, they're either paying people or they're paying for goods and services. With this financial markets, what the government can do in addition to taxes, as we know, we don't always have a balanced budget. They can borrow. They can borrow money from the financial markets in the form of government bonds. The way that this is funded is that they borrow this money, has to come from somewhere, right? It usually comes from the households in the form of our private savings. Firms can also borrow money. They can borrow by issuing stocks and or bonds if they are set up that way. And then once they get this this inflow of capital of money by issuing stocks and or bonds, they can invest it. They can use it as investment spending, building a bigger building, investing in better machinery, things like that. Now, as this is macroeconomics, we know that we aren't just concerned about what we're doing inside our own nation. The rest of the world also comes into play. And in the market for goods and services, we can export things, and then we can also import things. Now, I want you to be very careful and think about why the export arrow is pointing in towards the market for goods and services, and why the import arrow is pointing outward to the rest of the world. So let me reiterate, you can pause it if you want, but I'm going to answer this now, is we're talking about the flow of money. So whenever we export things, even though we're sending the actual thing to the rest of the world, what they're sending us is money. And whenever we import things, even though we're getting some sort of a good or service, we are also paying them with money. So the money is flowing out of our economy. We also allow the rest of the world to invest in our financial markets, as you, I'm sure, are aware. And then foreign borrowing, sales of stocks, Like as we all know, these are a lot of these stock sales. They're not just United States firms. They're going to be firms that are um, they're from abroad. So this is setting up our circular flow diagram. Please notice that, and what we need to assume is that all the arrows going out have to equal the arrows going in. So if $500 million is going out of one of these boxes, $500 million should be going into one of these boxes also. So I've talked about the flow of money, how things are going here. The total, what we want to really think about is in this market for goods and services, as you can see on the left-hand side of your screen. The last arrow we're going to talk about is called GDP, or gross domestic product. So the sum of all the arrows going in and then subtracting the imports that are going out, that leaves you with your GDP. That's the gross domestic product for a given nation that we're interested in. So keeping track of GDP can also be called or referred to as national accounts. So we're basically doing the accounting for the nation. And there's different things that we're going to talk about. And as I've already went into detail on these, but these definitions are important that you know where they are located on that circular flow diagram. So specifically, we have consumer spending, which again is the actual household spending on goods and services. Stock is a share of ownership in a company, whereas a bond is borrowing that's in the form of an IOU. So you have no ownership in whatever the bond is issued from. However, it is an IOU that they will be paying you back with, hopefully with interest. Government transfer is a payment for no goods or services being performed. It's just a direct transfer from the government to a person or a household for no actual good or service. And then we're left with disposable income. So whenever we have our income is in the form of wages and we pay out taxes. So we have wages and let me put in there government transfers. Take out the taxes, whatever is left of that amount, that's what we refer to as disposable income. You can therefore, on your discretion, you may choose to save it or spend it and how much. So then government borrowing, as I said, the government can borrow from those financial markets. And the government borrowing is defined as the total amount of funds borrowed by these governments in the financial markets. Now, the purchases of goods and services, it's expenditures on goods, which are actual physical things, and services by the government. So, as we know, whenever you get your paycheck, taking out taxes and any government add in any government transfers, you may save it or you may spend it. We refer to any of our savings as private savings. And that's going to be basically what's left over after you've chosen to spend X a number of dollars. And then there's also financial markets, which we will get into in more depth in later chapters as far as the banking industry, stocks and bonds. So gross domestic product is the total value of all final, let me emphasize final, goods and services. And there are going to be 3 ways that we can calculate this. So first of all, we may add up the total value of all final goods and services produced. So for instance, if we only make cars and lattes, we would add up the total value of all the cars that we produced for that year and all the lattes that we produced that year. And then that's it. That would be considered our GDP. A second way would be to add up the spending, so the actual consumer spending, looking at the households, the consumer spending on all domestically produced goods and services. So, for instance, you would want to know how much people actually spent on cars and lattes. And then lastly, you could add up the total factor income earned by households from firms in the economy. So if we had 2 firms, one that produced cars, one that produced lattes, you would add up the factor income earned by households in the form of rent for the building, wages paid, interest paid on borrowing, and any profit that the firm may earn. So you can add up all the factor incomes, and that would also give you what we refer to as gross domestic product. So those are our 3 ways, and we will talk about that in depth. We will do a handout and work through a table that will show you that each of these 3 ways provides you with the exact same outcome, the exact same GDP. Now, you say, what's not included? You've told me what is included and how to calculate it, but I don't know what I should or should not include because there are some gray areas. One thing that we do not include would be used goods. Why don't we include used goods? Because they've already been accounted for in a previous year's GDP. Sales of financial assets. We don't count those in final GDP because that is not a good or a service. Intermediate goods. We don't count that, or we don't count these intermediate goods because, for instance, if we counted the coffee beans that went into the latte and we counted the value of the coffee beans and we counted the final value of the latte, we would be double counting coffee beans. So you would have the coffee beans when they were purchased by the firm, the Starbucks, and then you would have, again, in the price of that latte is going to take into account the coffee bean price. So you would be double counting coffee beans. So any intermediate good, and you can think about it, same thing with the cars. You're not going to count the tires that are put on the car because the tires are part of the final good and service. It's an intermediate good. Lastly, we do not count American-based firms' goods that are produced outside of the United States. So what we're really interested in is how much, or the value of, the goods and services that are produced within our nation. If it's not produced within our nation, then we're not really that interested in it as far as gross domestic product is concerned. So that is going to end our webcast for today. I hope it is helpful for you, and please make sure that you refer to this before we start class on Monday so that we can start off and hopefully get to our handout. Have a great weekend.